Today, it's my privilege to introduce Zilka Siljak for the second time. We were really, many of us were gripped by the lecture that she gave us last year on women peacekeepers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Zilka is in her second and unfortunately final year as a research associate in our program. As many of you know, she holds master's degrees in human rights and democracy, jointly conferred by the University of Bologna and the University of Sarajevo, and a PhD in gender studies from the University of Novi Sad. The book that she's talking to us about today is the sixth, in which she has combined both her experience as a human rights activist and her enormous social scientific background in qualitative and quantitative research. It's so unusual to have these both brought together, particularly on this really critical topic. We don't have a lot of people giving us firsthand reports from conflict regions in general, from Bosnia and Herzegovina in particular. So we're very fortunate to have such a terrific scholar working in this area. Zilka's going to, are you going to hold up the book or can I hold up the book?
You can hold it.
I can, okay. I'm thrilled to be able to have in my hands the Bosnian edition of the book that Zilka will in part be talking about today, which she completed since her last talk with us. And I'm also delighted to say that the English edition is now in the final preparation for publication and will be coming out
Cambridge Scholar Publishing
from
UK.
Cambridge Scholar Publishing in the fall?
In the fall.
In the fall, yeah. And the English title of the book?
Shining Humanity.
Shining Humanity, and it gives the first-hand accounts that part of today's lectures will draw on. So
thank you.
I'm happy to introduce Zilka.
Thank you, Anne. And I would like to extend my gratitude to Women's Studies in the Religion Program, HDS community, and all of you who came today for this lecture. So I will start with brief introduction to my research project with the key lessons, and then I will discuss the topic peace building with and without God. So my project is about women and peace building in Bosnia, and it focuses on 11 women life stories whose courage, care, compassion, love, and dedication helped many to survive the harsh realm of the war from 1992 to 1995 in Bosnia and to continue building and rebuilding relationships and lives in the last 2 decades. My research covers the life stories of women who come from varying ethnic backgrounds, both religious and non-religious. They declare Bosniak, Croatian, Serbian, Jewish ethnic identity, and most of them declare religious identity, but some of them say they are agnostics. The selection criteria included recognition of them in their local communities, geographical distribution, and also scope of the work they have done, such as conflict resolution, peace education, psychosocial therapy, and human rights in the widest sense. This project, however, is not only about their courage and resistance. It is about their peace journey. And that journey was unpredicted, sometimes anticipated going into unknown in order to do what they think it was right at the very moment. I describe these moments as light of humanity, but some scholars and practitioners refer to that as sacredness and divinity with or without God, and we'll go back to that soon. Now I would like to just draw your attention to the key lessons of this research project. Lesson 1. Power of humanity transforms, reconciles, and brings peace among people. Therefore, it is important to enable that power to act. And these women acted first and foremost as human beings, and then as women, as Bosniaks, as Croats, Serbs, Jews, etc. Lesson 2. Peace work of 11 women from Bosnia was driven by care ethics, feminist ethics of justice and compassion, by the still existing socialist ethics of unity and equality, and the international human rights norms and standards integrated into the legal system of Bosnia. Lesson 3. Moral imagination of Bosnian women is reflected in their capacity to imagine themselves in a web of relationships in their communities, to embrace complexity without reliance on dualistic polarity, and to accept the risk of stepping into the mystery of the unknown outside of the comfort zone. Lesson 4. Rebuilding and building relationships was the essence of women's peace work, because relationship is the core of conflict and its resolution. Lesson 5. Religion was not a conversation starter for peace building in the first years after the war. Some of them didn't want to use religion because of various social and political reasons, and most of these women left God behind on purpose, whether because they didn't find religion relevant to their work, or because they didn't want God to be nationalized and politicized. Lesson 6. We learned from their stories that each of us can be a peace builder, only if we have a little bit more courage, vision, and faith to recognize and accept responsibility for other human beings. And finally, lesson 7, light of humanity, divinity, or sacredness exists in every person and between persons when they encounter the face of the other living presence, other human being. These women had countless divine or sacred moments in standing for humanity and dignity of other persons that makes their stories special and important. As I said, religion was not an important part of women peace-building activism right after the war, but that doesn't mean that those who are believers didn't follow ethic and commandments of their faith, and that they didn't acknowledge God's presence without explicit reference to it. When thinking about peace, there are some questions we need to pose. Do we need God to have peace? Do we think about God when we are engaged in peace? And is God there? And is he or she present, and how? How one refers to that presence and describe these moments of happiness, light of humanity, divine or sacredness depends on many factors, including one's religious or non-religious worldview and understanding of reality, relations, and responsibilities towards other human beings. I use the word other here with capital O, that in according to Emmanuel Levinas is the face of the other human being, which is not mere physical presence, but rather encounter with the face as living presence of other person. In his work, Totality and Infinity, Levinas wrote, "The face is a source from which all meanings appear. The face forbids us to kill. The face is primordial discourse whose first word is obligation." In Sufi literature, encounter of the other was discussed in terms of acknowledging sanctity of human being as the most perfect creation that reflects God's attributes, which doesn't mean that they are God, but that they sublime the entire universe, and yet they are not the entire universe. According to Sayyid Hussein Nasr, I quote, "Man's central position in the world is not due to his cleverness or inventive genius, but because of the possibility of attaining sanctity and becoming a channel of grace for the world around him," end of quote. The position of human being, according to Hadith tradition, is to reach the state higher than angels, and at the same time to deny God, enables him or her to reflect the primordial responsibility with acceptance of universality of suffering, but also to cause suffering to other human beings and to be the channel of this grace. Freedom of human beings makes them crown of creation with primordial responsibility. Through some of the stories, I would like to show two important things. First, the gift of responsibility, their responsibility to act as human beings. And second, incredible moments of light of humanity, divinity, or sacredness, or third dimension, Majority of women peace builders in Bosnia, although believers, didn't describe these moments of full humanness in encountering other human beings as religious or spiritual experience. They described them as pure humanness, moments of true happiness, grace, calmness, and moments when they felt they preserved their own humanity. Responsibility discourse is important, in particular today when human capabilities to accumulate and dominate are radically changed and appear to be a threat to destroy humanity and nature. Therefore, as Louis Madge, Christian theologian, points out, that we need a different kind of ethics which will seriously embrace the gift of responsibility. According to Madge, I quote, "The notion of responsibility arises in the very origins of selfhood. It follows that the gift of human being itself, the gift of transcendence, is given through the medium of the other, through my responsibility to him or her," end of quote. For Levinas, responsibility precedes any objective searching after truth, and it is the integral part of our own subjective constitution. When referring to Levinas on Levinas' idea on humanism and the other, Richard Coyne concluded, I quote, "Responsibilities are infinite, even if human are insufficient for them," end of quote. Levinas believed that each person owes a radical moral obligation to the other that he or she meets. Because, as much further elaborates on that, we do not become moral persons just because we practice some customs in our communities or by mastering ethical arguments at academia, like here at Harvard Divinity School. We become moral persons in confronting the face of the other. In that encounter with other, we realize that everything doesn't belong to us and that our consciousness doesn't encompasses everything. The face of the other reminds us that we are not the only one and that there is something absolutely apart from ourselves and that the world also belongs to the other. Recognition of humanity of the other is not, of course, sufficient, and according to Levinas, there is a radical moral imperative to serve the other. Serve not only as it is understood from the second commandment, love thy neighbor as yourself, but love thy neighbor is oneself. To serve, to sacrifice, and even to die for other human being, which I found in some of the stories, and we'll come back to that soon. However, we need to distinguish between helping and serving. Ann Cadlin, occupational therapist, clearly explains the difference, and I quote, "Helping implies inequality. When we help, we are doing something to or for the person which places us in position of power over them. Helping is about doing. And we may cling to or hide behind our techniques or our roles, which actually distances us from the one we think we are helping. To serve is to become a part of the experience of the person we are serving. It is relationship of equality and a dynamic interaction that flows both ways. Serving is not about doing, it's about being," end of quote. It's not always easy to explain what confronting or encounter of the living presence means, but it can be meeting of two full human presences, two life forces, two souls, two spirits, and the encounter of what is the essence of both parties, both fully human and fully engaged in dialogue with each other. Similarly, as Martin Buber explained, the I meeting the thou, or holiness of humanity in you, and thus both parties can respond and see each other as human beings, not as objects. Buber further explains, when I confront you, God is there. We can encounter him or her if we believe, and reflect on that encounter in that way. If not, for believers, God is still there, and for non-believers, this might be a moment of pure humanness and experiencing the third dimension that is not expressed in religious categories. Some scholars argue that human society is more than two dimensions: a horizontal one that connects us with other people and nature, and vertical dimension of the organized, institutionalized, at what our Professor Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza would say, hierarchical religions that tend to connect people with transcendence. However, there is something more than two dimensions. As American psychologist Jonathan Haidt explains, I quote, There is a third dimension, something that is uplifting, beautiful, and fulfilling, something that is not easy to describe, and maybe is not possible to describe, but needs to be experienced, being there, being present, end of quote. According to Haidt, it is divinity. It depends on one's beliefs, which may and may not be about God. In his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, he says, I quote, "My research on the moral emotions has led me to conclude that the human mind simply does perceive divinity and sacredness, whether or not God exists." End of quote. Human actions and thoughts bring them up or down closer or further from the divine or from the moments of presence. If Haidt is right, where we find and how we situate these moments in sacredness. Although it is hard to describe sacredness, Dr. Goldstein, in her text, Sacred Moments, Implications of Well-Being and Stress, elaborates on sacred qualities, such as gratefulness, feeling of connection, with and support from the transcendence, sweet, sadness, compassion, and or deep sense of inner peace, and that one needs to be imbued with descriptive qualities such as precious, blessed, cherished, and or holy. In order to experience a sacred moment, the moment needs to be imbued by the individual with these sacred qualities. They can happen every day during mystical experiences or also under extraordinary circumstances such as crises, war, or post-war recovery. It is important not to neglect compassion as an important quality for making sacred moments. And Caitlin adds to that, I quote, "When we touch one another with a compassionate heart, it creates a sacred moment," end of quote, because it is not something we can learn. It is universal and flows from the heart that cracks down and opens up. But as peace-building scholar Elizabeth Porter warns us, we have to be cautious about the understanding of compassion to avoid making the other as object. I quote, "Compassion is not charity or condescension toward others. Compassion is grounded in a response to the equal worth and value of every person's humanity and our equal vulnerability to suffering," end of quote. In the 11 stories, I found incredible testimonies of empathy, compassion, love, and sacredness that were experienced, but in most of the cases, not specifically related to God and not expressed in religious categories. So in the first story, as you can see here on the slide, we find extraordinary example of serving, not just helping. Therefore, her neighbors are the best mirrors of her own humanity. And Danka explained Danka takes seriously with due diligence that she was determined to confront the fate of her Serb returnees in Bosansko Grahovo, whose villages were destroyed and burned, and who were not welcomed by the local Croatian authorities in that region. As a young police officer, she listened her inner voice, and she wanted to decide what was right to do only after she met these people, and she reports, I quote, "There is no household or village in this region in which I haven't been. I came to know these people and became one with them." She became one with those who suffered. Her responsibility was not limited to mere support and formality in interaction. She wanted to get to know these people to be able to better understand them and better help them. Danka's strong sense of duty to help and serve those in need comes out of her religious upbringing and her understanding that faith must be reflected in deeds. However, her family, who was also religious, couldn't understand why she wanted to work with these people and live in danger if she could live in less disturbing place with more comfort. Her faith in God moved her to be with those who suffered and who were denied their rights. She admitted that she couldn't fix all their problems, but she could listen and share what she had. She believes that she will keep helping until the day she dies. And I quote, "No matter the cost, I'll help. One day it will be repaid. I don't know what our future has in store for us, but I believe that God sees all and that God is watching. He'll repay us in some way, and even if he doesn't, it's normal to do something like that." End of quote. In Danka's story, we find that faith in God is best reflected in practical love for the other. Being there for her neighbors was fulfilling and empowering for her personal well-being and the well-being of her Serb neighbors. And as Dietrich Bonhoeffer explains, I quote, God is effectively present among human beings in the way they are there for each other, because human beings do not exist unmediated qua spirit in and of themselves, but only in responsibility vis-a-vis an other, end of quote. Another important issue in her story and approach in peace building is recognition of suffering of the other, who became her close neighbor. Following Bonhoeffer's thesis on suffering, Ivan Šarčević, a Catholic theologian from Bosnia, underlines the universality of suffering in dialogue as criteria for becoming close thy neighbor. Šarčević further refers to the biblical story about Samaritan man, stating that he didn't help because he was having different ethnic and religious identity, but because he was merciful and good, and then Samaritan. Genuine division among people is not based on their race, class, religion, culture, but one's heart and goodness. Danka's story demonstrates the suffering of her Serb neighbors was far more important than any identity and imposed divisions, and therefore she responded from her heart, not as Croatian, not as Catholic as the primary impulse, but as somebody whose heart was open to understand the gift of responsibility in confrontation of the other human being and suffering of the other person. Next story deepens the encountering discourse, because for Amra, confronting the face of the other was not limited only to the post-war recovery and rebuilding relations with neighbors and friends, but it was extended to recognition of the enemy in the middle of the war. In 1993, when Sarajevo was under the siege, surrounded by Serbs, Amra was faced with the first moral dilemma, to talk or not to talk with Serbs. And I quote, "There was shooting around, there was bombs going off, and the president of youth organization from Belgrade called us. He wanted to come to Sarajevo. Opinions were quite divided. I stood up and said, no. And then a guy in the group reacted, if you do not receive him, you are the same as Karadzic. If a man wants to come, that means he doesn't support the policy of Greater Serbia and that not all Serbs are the same." She became intrigued by the young man who had expressed himself so tellingly, and she was told that he was a Serb from Sarajevo. This encounter was a turning point for Amra, one that changed the course of her life and the world around her. Her entire peace work was marked by the premise to allow all voices to be heard. She was not religious at that time, but her gift of responsibility came from the liberal Marxist values, modeled by strong women in her family and the intellectual legacy of her grandfathers. When she later embraced Islam, she wanted to show that as a believer, she was even more responsible to promote and advocate for pluralism of ideas and practices. For her, every suppressed voice means suppressing an important part of creation and consequently God. For her, denying one's voice was denying possibility of human being to attain sanctity and become a channel of grace, as Nasser understands the essence of human being. Every human face and every voice is a new possibility to attain harmony and peace and to experience these moments of pure humanness or sacredness. For her, God is always present, where two persons decide to do good, according to the famous hadith. As much as it was hard to face the enemy during the war, it was even more challenging to confront the face of her fellow brothers and sisters in the Islamic community after the war. Her open heart and readiness to work together with teachers of religion in public schools enabled her to create a safe space for dialogue that brought them to accept Amra as peace builder and feminist, and helped Amra to understand their fear to open up and initiate conversation with those who committed crimes against Bosniaks. The safe place echoed with the blessing of God's presence and sacred moments both parties came to appreciate as a new level in communication of different and sometimes diametrically opposite perspectives on dialogue and the encounter of the other. For Amra, her intention, in Arabic niyya, was crucial because her open heart and good niyyah helped opening the hearts of the other in dialogue. And her calling was exactly about to help the other to open up his or her heart for something new that could be born out of each of these encounters. The next story gives us an interesting testimony on the gift of responsibility and amazing faith in humanness and God. It is a story about civic education as a safe platform for peace building designed by Rahela Židić, a Bosnian Jew who had to leave during the war for Israel, but soon after the war she came back with her family to Sarajevo because they loved it and they thought that by a confessional marriage of a Jew and a Muslim, Sarajevo would be a better place to live. Rahela was a successful electric engineer and she quit her job in the state phone company to work on civic education in Bosnia. She knew how important civic education was, especially for the post-conflict society where everything was ruined and destabilized with the new political ideology on power. Communism was replaced by ethno-nationalism. She wanted progress and hope for the youth to find sense in the future of Bosnia. Rahela never lost faith because she believed young people should be given a chance. However, she claims that such work requires sacrifice and believed that things can be different regardless of the opponents. Her vision of relations in society is meritocracy, and all other identities, though important, are second place to one's competence and capabilities. Thus, she was ready to take the risk of living outside of ethno-national boxes. However, in post-war Bosnia, the political elites teach that everything should be divided by three, the Bosnia, Croats, and Serb, while the others, minorities, have almost no rights. And she belonged to minorities as a Jew. It was therefore important for her to let people to get to know her. In that encounter, she believed changes could occur, and they did. She managed to bring together teachers and children from three ethnic groups together, to meet, to talk, and to work. In that encounter, she created the safe place, the platform for dialogue and reconciliation. Her gift of responsibility, mediated by her family upbringing with the socialist ethics of equality and her faith in God, who requires accountable believer, made her determined to stand for dignity of children in the post-war Bosnia. While serving others to get the same opportunities her children have had, and that all children deserve to have, she kept her own dignity. The dignity of herself was unsurpassable responsibility for other children. As Levinas explains, and it requires seeking for justice for the other we encounter. It was not easy. However, because divided people in ethnically homogenized communities didn't trust somebody who was offering something new and didn't come from one of the three ethnic communities. She reflects on first encounters. I quote, "Many people think you are crazy or just pretending, but you know in your heart that it is true, and you let them criticize you and spit on you. Whatever they do, you ignore it. And continue working and looking into the eyes of children who meet each other and want to meet again. And you say, I'll make that happen. There is the click. And I thought, why hasn't anyone told me this before? And you just know you have to have strength to continue." End of quote. What Rahela saw in the eyes of children was the genuine hope and desire for things to be different, for someone to help them open the doors of closed communities and take them to a safer future. During these encounters, she experienced moments of pure humanness, happiness and fulfillment that she was doing the right thing. She didn't refer to these moments as sacred or spiritual experiences, but her mind perceived something what Jonathan Haidt calls third dimension that uplifted her and assured her that she was doing the right thing. For Rahela, God exists. But her peace-building encounters with the face of the other, children from different ethnic groups, was narrated in secular terms and categories. And the sparkles in the eyes of children she met were described as moments of the light of humanity, something she couldn't precisely express by words, but something she was deeply aware of. Language, of course, matters. But in this situation, it doesn't mean how we call that experience pure humanness or sacredness or divine moments or third dimension. What is important is that she made them happen for herself and the other. And the last story is a testament of serving of the other, with the understanding of the second commandment of as love thy neighbor is oneself, as Levinas radically portrays the moral obligation towards the other. In the most terrible situation during the war, Stanojka wanted to save one's life, but the cost was too high for almost everybody except for her, who was the mother with capital M, because her motherhood embraced not only her own children and her own biological family. She promised to her own mother and her Muslim friend's mother she would take care of her friend and her son, and she did. But her promise was tested several times during the war, and once she experienced the hardest moment of her life. It was Christmas in 1993, Orthodox Christmas, January 7. And she had decided to come back home to Bosnia from Serbia, where she was staying with her daughters and her Muslim friend and her son. They spent peaceful Christmas, but tomorrow they had to come back to Serbia because of the new development on the war between Bosniak Muslims and Serb Orthodox in that region. She thought her friend's license she got in Belgrade to move freely was sufficient for them to return to the village in Serbia. But due to the latest events on the front lines, the local police force was replaced with the soldiers from Serbia, and they were under masks. And at the bridge, the soldier asked for the document, and I quote, "He asked for the papers, naturally. My ID, nothing. He just had glanced at it, and he asked, 'Your kids?' And I said, 'Two girls, here and this boy.' Then he requested, 'Ma'am,' and my friend gave him her ID, the old pre-war ID. He opened it and stared at it disbelievingly. He looked at her. 'What brings you here, Turk? Can you believe it? Her father's name is Alija, and she's walking around Republic of Srpska.' Despite the fact that her friend's name was not identifiable by the categories of ethnic and religious identity, and the fact that she dressed like all other women, the name of her father, Alija or Ali, stirred a reaction. It was a typical Muslim name, but more intriguingly, it was also the name of the president of Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Alija Izetbegović. The guards didn't expect a Muslim woman to be walking around freely in Republic of Srpska. So they sardonically labeled her a Turk, one of the names given to Bosniak Muslims to link them to the Ottoman occupation and to deny them their original identity. For the masked guards, the encounter was the perfect opportunity to exert power over the lives of others under the condition of war. The soldier in the mask shouted, "We have a balinkusha for the floor." The floor meant that they would kill her. Labeling her with derogative term for a Muslim woman, balinkusha, it was as if the masked soldier wanted to humiliate her even further. She recalls that they were already exhausted after the long walk and terrified at what might happen to them at the checkpoint. Upon hearing them threaten to kill her friend, she suddenly resorted to using the authority of her husband's family, hoping that family's reputation would be enough to let them go. However, the soldiers obviously had different orders, and they were not impressed by her performance. And then, in encountering the face of her fellow Serb soldier who wanted to kill her Muslim friend, she did something she cannot explain even today. Her gift of responsibility was a unique sacred act, an act that makes everybody speechless. She told to the soldiers, I quote, "I'm from family Tešić, so hero, you would first have to slaughter my 2 kids." And I took my 2 daughters and pushed them in front of his legs. "You would first have to do this." And then he stopped. It wasn't really easy for him. Then he said, "Who is this woman? Who are you, ma'am?" And I said, "Go and check." She called the guard hero, thereby questioning the heroism of hiding behind a mask and exerting force upon women and children. Today, she cannot remember what he went to check, but after several minutes, which seemed to them like years standing at the doors of hell, the man came back and said, "We are sorry, ma'am. We didn't know who you were. Do you need a ride?" She said that this was the most difficult moment in her life, but the authority of her family had nevertheless been crucial. While this may have been true, her determination and her courage to shift the weight of her moral dilemma onto the guard obviously stunned him. Her gift of responsibility for the life of her Muslim friend and her son came from her partisan's upbringing and the Marxist values promoted in her husband's family, in particular by her father-in-law. She doesn't mention God, although she is a believer. But for her, the promise she gave to her friend's mother and her own mother that she was going to take care of her friend obliged her to do everything to protect her. For her, motherly love is the greatest love in the world, but motherhood had stretched to include her friend's child. This was superhuman, unselfish act of a mother who was not only focused on her own children, but also exhibited what Sarah Rudik described as rationalized care, focused on others. Her intention was to be protective and helpful to those around her, regardless of any blood connection. She did it, not as a Serb, not as Orthodox Christian, but as a woman whose heart was big enough to embrace her friend's child as her own. She thus became a moral person by confronting the face of the other, both her friend and the soldier under the mask at the checkpoint at the bridge. Whether God was there at the bridge or not, for her it was not important. Because she felt she did the right thing, she saved one life. She showed her humanness in front of the face of the other human being that could be a reflection of God's presence and grace, or simply sacred moment without acknowledging God. But she was at that moment a channel of grace, whether she expressed it in that category or not. And I will conclude. What made these women responsible agents of change and what stirred their moral imagination to act as true human beings differ from story to story. But what they all have in common is the gift of responsibility, and they all recognize the universality of suffering and that keeping one's own dignity requires standing for the dignity of other human beings. They all experienced and narrated about incredible moments of humanness, sacredness, or divine, but they didn't refer to these moments as something religious or spiritual. Although some of them acknowledged God's presence, while some didn't find it relevant, what mattered to all of them was reaching the heart of the other, who was not the object of support and compassion, but equal party in the encounter process. These women decided not only to do things with helping, but more importantly, to be the one who becomes in communities of creative interactions. So following their examples, we can also try not only to do, but also to become. And who knows what we might discover on that journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this incredibly challenging presentation. I know some people have classes at 2 o'clock, so we understand if anybody needs to get up and go, but the rest of us do have some time for questions. So we can open the floor.
So you are speechless? Come on.
Question? Yeah.
I was wondering, through the piece, you were primarily interested in these moments of sort of illumination that people... Oh, sorry. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I was curious if in the design of the project, if you were interested primarily in these moments of illumination that you described, or of exposure to the other, a sense of an ethical exposure, or if you're interested in sort of more sustained peace-building activities, and if so, I was thinking particularly, I don't know if you know the story of a truck driver who was bringing people up to the execution lines after Srebrenica, and they shot a group of men, and there was a child standing there at the end alive, and obviously irreparably traumatized, but everyone on the line refused to shoot him. And the commander yelled at them, I can see you're nodding, seeing this, and they all refused. And so they told the truck driver to take the boy and bring him back with the next load of people. And the truck driver couldn't and took the boy away. And so that, to me, resonated with how you're talking about moments. Now, obviously, those people are not sustained profiles of peace builders. But it resonated, at least in a way, of trying to understand what happens in a moment where you can't refuse the exposure to the other.
No, this was not the primary reason why I conducted this research. I started to explore these themes more recently. Last year I presented about the research and the background of research and why I did these life stories. First of all, I wanted to bring on the surface positive narratives of my country, and also to say that something good is developing there in the last 20 years. Then also to make the work of women visible, because their work 20 years after the war is not visible enough, although they have done an incredibly important job and they've been still doing it. So, and since they didn't reflect in their stories on these moments and they didn't pay particular attention to that, I didn't elaborate more in the book about these moments. But when I finished the book, when I finished their stories, I found a rich material from their transcripts and these stories, to develop something new and also to reflect on these moments. They, as I said, described as pure humanness, as something they couldn't even describe, like the last story. I mean, Sana was not able to describe what has happened at the bridge, but she knew she had to do something to protect one's life, and also she felt that was right at that very moment to do that. And then to have that power and strength, to give her own children and to deal with her moral dilemma, and that way was really, really amazing. So I was initially looking for these stories as more sustained peace building activity that can also serve all of us as a model, as a lesson, so what we can do. And one of the lessons I presented at the beginning is that really these women are not saints, they're not perfect. They're ordinary women, and all of them say that, but with a little bit more courage, with vision, with faith, that we can do something only if we are able to move, to stand up and try to do the things we believe they are important. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on this question just a bit more with you, Zelica. First of all, just thank you so much for the presentation and for the work that you've done with these women. I've known many in Bosnia, as you know, women and men, who have done astounding similar things. And I love the focus on relationship building. I think that is critical. I also noticed, for example, the number of organizations these women are connected with. Medica Zenica, Civitas, Helsinki Citizens of Banja Luka, Women in Black. So they are connected beyond just these very powerful snippets, very important stories that you've told. They are connected with social movements. So I'd like to kind of build on her question of kind of how do you see that connection developing? What kind of impact does it have on not only other people in terms of their relationships, which I think is extremely important, but here you're dealing with people involved in what does education mean in Bosnia today? What does politics mean? Can you expand, I guess, is my question. However you want to.
I can try. So yes, these women are coming from various non-governmental organizations. They started these organizations or they became part of them during the war or after the war, depends when NGOs were established, and most of the NGOs were established after the war. Only Medica Zenica was formed during the war because German feminists came to Bosnia to help us with the first center for wartime rape women. And yes, they made these organizations as platform for social change. and they do different kinds of activities there. So it's not, it's also education, it's psychosocial work, therapies, conflict resolution, but also in the last 10 years they've been involved in changing more close collaboration with the state institution to change the legislation, to improve the policies, to advocate for changes within the institutions of the country, but also among the citizens. So they work on different levels, and depends on the expertise they have in these organizations. They cover different kinds of different parts of social and political activism. Thank you. Yeah.
Very cooperative group.
Yes. Yeah. Oh.
Thank you very much, Zilka. I'm an admirer of your work. Thank you for sharing this with us. I have a question that goes back to one of the lessons that you were talking about, that your research taught you or teaches us, and the one about relationships, so that the basis for all of this is relationship building. And I'll tell you first maybe where my question comes from. There's quite some... So I want to ask about what are the conditions for those relationships, and where it comes from is this: there's quite some sociological research that kind of basic, and I would even dare to add kind of banal, that wants to see if people have less prejudices about others if there is more proximity, right? So if people meet others in their daily life, will they have less prejudices? And most of that research shows that that is not the case. And then I'm also thinking, not in the realm of research, but some projects that try to bring groups of people together for peace building, and the projects fail sometimes, right? So I'm wondering if your research tells us more. I mean, I'm sure it does, but I'm wondering if you could highlight what are the conditions for those encounters, meetings, relationships to actually make it happen? Because we have enough examples that just putting two people in a room might not necessarily lead to peace, right? So can you tell us a bit more about what are the qualities of those relationships, or the conditions in which they need to be made?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, relationships are really important, and they are a critical part of their peace activism. And yes, there are some researches that show that more proximity or more interaction, more encounter brings, basically provide us with better understanding of each other, and brings less prejudices. And I also personally experienced that, and that's why I believe that is important to go among people and to communicate and to present yourself. And sometimes if they do not want to listen for the first time, you should come back again and again, and it can work. But sometimes, due to different reasons, you need to go back and explore what is behind that, what that particular community or group of people, what were the social and political implications on their lives, and why they didn't want to be involved more profoundly in these encounters and reconciliation and peace-building activities. But when it comes to these women, for their work was crucial the post-war recovery and return of people to their pre-war homes, repatriation. And everybody in Bosnia was experienced the war consequences on all sides. You had victims, you had people who lost their homes, their families. They had to go back to their homes to rebuild their homes, but also not only homes, but relationships. And then these women within their organizations and in collaboration with many international organizations try to provide support, but under conditions that people from different villages collaborate. So they're gonna get support for agriculture or to rebuild their homes, but they have to do it together, or to build houses together, or if they will educations, they will provide educators or activists from all sides. So simply, you know, to make them, to accustom them to start to communicate. Of course, you cannot expect from the first encounter to have people ready immediately for peace and understand the one who expelled them from their homes to accept them and then continue living as if nothing has happened before. But over time, since the economic and political situation over time was not improved much, so people themselves started to think that way, that collaboration and communication will bring the benefit for all of them, and in particular those who were minorities. And in Bosnia, everybody's minority depends on which part of the country you live. So if you are a Bosniak Muslim, live in southwest Herzegovina among Croatian Catholics, you are a minority. And then, of course, you will be immediately for dialogue and you will try to communicate more, and vice versa. So over time, as the state failed to help them to establish institutions and to provide support they owed to these people, so they organized themselves and they started collaborating for the benefit of their children. So they understood, if I want my child to go to school, and if I want to have health care, if I want to be active citizen in that part of the country, I need to communicate. And then out of that need for the life, for survival in these communities, they started collaborating, but not everywhere. So there are some parts where people even today do not communicate, and it is really hard to make them to start collaboration and to understand and to accept that not all Serbs are war criminals, or not all Croats or Bosniaks. So the imposed isolation within these ethnically homogenized entities, cantons, and in communities made people even more reluctant to communicate. So the only work that has been done was the work by these organizations and some other organizations. So they worked under really difficult conditions right after the war, but what was important, that they always found a way to help them to organize their lives and to rebuild their lives in the communities of their return. In one of the stories, for instance, one peace builder said, right after the war, international communities came with the agenda of democratization of the country. So we wanted to help people. They need their homes to be rebuilt. They need cows. They need, livestock and other things. But the international community imposed democratization. So what these women have done, they learned how to pack buying cows for these people under democratization. So they were so creative, to make projects for the UN agencies or European agencies, and to pack them to look that they are doing democratization, but they wanted to help them. So the conditions were different, and the quality of these relations depends how much time they spent in each of these communities. So they also reported that it was not enough to go once or twice to one community and to provide support for them and leave, it's important to do capacity building and to organize something for them to be able to continue these activities together. So that's why it is one of the challenges they've been still struggling, how to do that, especially in some remote areas where people do not have so many facilities and available for communication, and also they are impoverished. They do not have enough for living. I don't know, did I answer your question?
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear about these grassroots efforts to oppose the sort of nationalist construction of politics in post-state in Bosnia. I'm wondering the extent to which these local organizations that you describe are sufficiently organic and sufficiently sustainable, and how many of them rely in any significant degree on external support. I'm also curious, in part because she was here just last week, where you situate the efforts of Svetlana Broz in reference to these lower profile but still obviously deeply committed people. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, most of these organizations are not sustainable, so they are still dependent on the international funding, because Bosnian state doesn't function, and it doesn't provide support for non-governmental organizations like in other normal countries. So they cannot rely on any support from the state institutions, and since the legislation prohibit non-governmental sector to make profit, so they are stuck. So they can only apply for different kinds of projects. But there are some also organic, genuine local grassroots activities where people do different kinds of activism, not project-based, but out of their desire to make some changes and to help their neighbors and friends. Svetlana Broz also is one of the women mentioned by the local community, not only in Sarajevo, but all around Bosnia, and she was on the list of women. But of course, according to the criteria I had for this research, I couldn't include all of them, but Svetlana Broz is definitely on the list, and her work also is part of this peace activism, and the book she wrote about good people in the time of evil was really incredible. But this research is more focused on the entire life stories and their reflections on specifically on the moments of the peace work and rebuilding and building new relationships. Thank you for mentioning her.
There's a question back there. If you can pass them on.
Hi, Zilka.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm thinking back to the presentation you gave last year, and one of the remarks that stayed with me that you made was that you said you didn't want to essentialize about gender and to say that women are inherently somehow more saintly than men or more courageous in these ways. I would love to hear you say more about the gender landscape in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to what extent you see Bosnia and Herzegovina as distinctive in terms of gender roles and gender relations. I can think of, just in my brief experiences there, I can think of wonderful men who I admire deeply, as artists and courageous peace builders, but at the same time there's a deeply entrenched nationalistic, harsh patriarchy that crosses ethnic lines. So I guess, I think the essence of the question is, to what extent do you see Bosnia and Herzegovina as unique in terms of its gender landscape, and to what extent does it illustrate maybe broader global patterns in terms of patriarchy and resistance to patriarchy. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thanks.
I wouldn't say that Bosnia is unique in terms of gender landscape. Bosnia is like most of the post-socialist or post-conflict countries, but Bosnia hasn't had a chance for the post-conflict recovery as, for instance, our neighboring countries, Croatia and Serbia, had. So, and due to the constitutional framework we got here in Dayton in 1995, we are finally stuck and we are not able to do anything. And that constitution basically imposed these ethnic divisions. And as I said, in Bosnia, whatever ones do is based on the ethnic identity. These women have been trying to resist that, but it is hard if you want to operate, for instance, women in the entity of Republic of Srpska. If you want to operate in that part of the world, you are under the surveillance, under the screen of the state institutions, and they can easily, ban some of your activities, or they can easily make troubles for you. So it's not easy for them. So they can collaborate with women from other parts of the country on different projects, but when it comes to the crucial issues, like the changes of the constitution, like the changes of the imposed ethnic divisions, they do not have power to do anything, because legally we cannot make better than we have now. So we first of all need the constitution changes, and then to have better collaboration of all of these stakeholders. But when it comes to patriarchy, I would say that it's similar to all other Balkans countries, but also similar to the United States, similar to other European countries, because patriarchy changes colors, but the essence is there. So you just have different wrapping, but everything is the same. And in Bosnia, it's worse in terms that we have this ethno-national and ethno-religious ideology imposed to people, and it makes us more uncomfortable with these identities. And if you want to try to escape out of these boxes, it's really hard. You're going to be sanctioned. And some of these women really experienced harsh sanctions. So this is maybe the difference, the crucial difference. But in general, I mean, in terms of patriarchal relations and gender roles, they are more or less similar. And the percentage of women in public life, in parliaments and in state institutions, is similar to other countries, although it is not good, and it is not at the level of the socialist Yugoslavia, for instance. So we still didn't reach that level.
Thank you, Zilka. I was struck by many of the testimonies, but especially one, where the lady said that if we could add another identity as a citizen of a democracy. I don't know if I have a question formed, but I was thinking that they all seem to have another identity as human beings. That, what you said, that, whether they have a religious inspiration or not, but they do think in terms of humanitarianism, which is the primary identity. But I was also thinking about this national identity, which, for the former Yugoslavia, that didn't seem to work because the ethnic identities came forward. And I was wondering about, this idea of a supra-local identity, a bigger state identity, trying to trump ethnic identities. What have you seen in your current work? How strong are they always?
Supra-local identities.
No, the local identities.
Local identities. Bosnia is a small country, so and the ethnic divisions and the life in the last 20 years in homogenized ethnically homogenized communities made people to think primarily in the framework of these three ethnic identities, or they can be like in former Yugoslavia, unidentified or Bosnians, like citizens of Bosnia, because according to our constitution, we are not citizens of Bosnia, we are Bosniak Croat Serbs, which is not the case in any other country in the world. So you have to be, first of all, recognized as a citizen of your country, and then you can be whatever ethnically, nationally. So the problem with Bosnia is that due to different historical and political reasons, people in Bosnia do not accept that overall Bosnian identity, and it is really hard to talk about that. Only minorities, and according to the census, and we'll see what's we have after the last census last year, 10% of people comprise the minorities, which means Jews, Albanians, Hungarians, and other minorities, but they do not have power to change anything. So most of the people still choose ethnic identities because you live in the country where everything is operated in that way, and you cannot get a job, you cannot get anything if you do not comply with these ethnic identities. So most people, even if they do not find it relevant or important, they have to opt for that because it's a matter of survival.
Zilka, thank you very much. These are very, very impressive stories and very inspiring. And I'm wondering if you've taken away any policy implications. What are the lessons for the international community? What are the lessons for national civil service and civil society organizations that we can take from these stories? How do we scale this up?
For the national or international?
Maybe for both.
For both.
Just to make it easy.
So to complicate the question more. Okay. Oh, it's not easy to answer that, but I'll try. So apart from the lessons I mentioned, and if we exclude political implications, I think the basic lesson for Bosnian people is that we could always find a way to live together, despite all the wars we've been through and all the divisions that were imposed to us through centuries. So people can see after this war and through these stories, these narratives, that it's possible to be a human being, to stay a human being in the midst of terror, and also to find goodness and humanity even if those who you consider enemy for the moment during the war, right after the war. So I think an important lesson is really this humanity, that humanity is really, the first lesson I mentioned here, the power of humanity, that it overcomes all barriers. And it's possible to reach the heart and mind of the person only if you personally believe that is possible. So this is something what these women reflect, strong personal belief and faith that is possible to approach to another human being in that way. But internationally, there are so many lessons for internationals, not to impose rules and then withdraw from the country and leave us to deal with consequences, but I think this is another topic, so we can elaborate on.
Well, Zilka, thank you so much. Our time is up, but this is inspiring was, I think, the right word. We're all wondering if we could live up to these models, and it's a great thing for us to be thinking about and take away. Thank you so much for your